Hey, what's up guys, my name is Azoh, and today we're going to take a look at Z build, runes and masteries for Season 7. First of all, if you're heading into a game right now, and you just rush to look up Z build, runes and masteries, then here you go, use this. It's somewhat universal, it's definitely going to work out fine in your game, and best of luck. To the rest of you, I had some problems making this video, not only because of the lethality buffs I spoke of last week, but also the fact that even pros are kind of split on what to take in runes. When I checked some weeks back, it was approximately a 70 to 30 split, with full AD versus lethality reds or even full lethality, and after the lethality changes, it's been a bit more diffuse. Bottom line, and I've said this before, if you have a preference that fits your playstyle, that's oftentimes what's going to work out best for you, as long as you are aware of the style's spikes and weaknesses. For example, full lethality isn't going to be as strong early game, but will scale very well, especially if you build items for it, while full AD is devastating in early game, but doesn't scale particularly well comparatively. So with that out of the way, my preferred runes are lethality reds, HP per level seals, MR glyphs and AD quints. This isn't a standard pro page, this is the one I've been using for a very long time, and it's the one I favor. A standard pro page would look something like this. 80 reds, HP per level seals, 6 scaling CDR glyphs to get 10 CDR at level 18, 3 MR per level glyphs, and 80 quints. Now the reasoning behind this is to have a very aggressive early game and to hit 40% CDR in late game. And the scaling HP is mainly because of how quickly it catches up to flat HP. Around level 6 more specifically. Another interesting page would be essentially either of these, but with full lethality. Rushing lethality and getting as much of it as you can, essentially giving you true damage against certain targets if you get sufficiently ahead. So when I wrote the script for this video and recorded parts of it, it was before the announcement of the lethality buffs, which is the buff that increased it from 40% to 60% starting value, meaning at level 1 you get 40% of lethality as arm penetration, based on the enemy's level, and then scaling from level 1 to 18. At level 18 it's 100%. Now it starts at 60%, which is a significant buff. Now everything in the video I said is still legit, but I wanted to add another rune page that I've been trying out, it's been working out fantastically. So it's basically just a standard rune page, and I do believe I mentioned this, but the defensive runes you can kind of do whatever with, but most people would do HP per level seals. You can mix around with armor if you want for auto attack lanes or full AD teams or whatever. But you do full lethality reds and then 2 lethality quints and 1 AD quints. This might seem a little bit strange because the 1 AD quint looks a little bit out of place. But the reason for it is that without 1 AD quint, you cannot last hit ranged minions at level 1 under turret without any extra damage. It's not a situation you often get into because you don't often get pushed in, but at least on level 1. But with so many champions that do it recently, I just have had found myself in a situation where I just need to be able to consistently last it like that. And honestly, you will not feel the difference between 1 lethality and 1 AD, so that little bit of utility doesn't really matter. On top of that, lethality memes just seems to be the hype. And the reason why it works out so well is because you get 30 lethality instantly with the Yomas and Dirk, and then you round out the build with the Black Cleaver so you catch up in CDR, because the problem with rushing lethality and only lethality is that you don't get enough CDR to really get full value from it. So Black Cleaver not only rounds out your comp with CDR, it's a good source of AD, it gives you survivability, it gives you another source of shred, so you have more to say about high armor targets. Overall, it's a really solid item. I'll talk more about that later. And then you round out the build again with either Duskblade or Edge Knight, depending on what the enemy comp is building. So that's why it works out really well. People are really hyping lethality. It's interesting, and I'll definitely update you guys as time goes on what I've discovered or what I'm doing. But so far, this rune page and a kind of full lethality page works fine. You can also do the things I'm going to mention later on this video. They still work fine. Honestly, overall, a big theme about the later seasons is that a lot of things still work fine, but you can experiment a lot more freely, I think. But lethality, full lethality is fine. Skipping lethality is also fine. Good luck with your games. Carry on the video. As I mentioned, you can experiment with what you like, and in the end, even if there is a quote-unquote optimal build page, runes, etc., just use what works best for you, but always consider why the pros build what they do, and if there's something subsequently you can learn from it. Moving on to Masteries, I run a fairly standard 12-18 Thunderlords page, but I will go over each mastery individually and compare them to each other. Savagery is simply for pushing and last hitting early on, though an argument can definitely be made for roaming with Wanderer, but I personally just don't feel the difference from it enough to warrant it. Assassin should be fairly self-explanatory, more damage when you're alone, which is a lot of the time. An argument could be made for Runic Affinity, but I honestly just can't justify skipping Assassin. It is just too good. Merciless should also be fairly self-explanatory. Not only is it in itself very effective on Zed, oftentimes making the Deathmark pop, passive, etc. stronger, but I just feel like I wouldn't get enough value from Meditation on Zed. Tier 4 is a bit trickier, and I concede that Greenfather's Gift might be better than Dangerous Game, especially for a roaming playstyle, but I just feel like I don't get the value from it in mid lane. Nor is the roam through brushes and immediately into an attack from mid lane consistent enough for me to take it over Dangerous Game, which I will freely admit I have gotten way too used to not take at this point. But tier 4 is definitely optional to whichever you prefer out of the two. Precision versus intelligence is, in my opinion, not a very hard choice, especially if you're going lethality heavy, which most plays are, and especially with the lethality buffs. Additionally, it's easy to run out of energy on Zed with 45% CDR, especially after the changes to his E. The cooldown might be very low, but you're still capped by energy. There is benefit to having 40% or even 45% CDR in that your W and ultimate will have significantly shorter cooldowns, but it still takes a lot of experience and skill to manage the kit properly without running out of energy constantly. And finally, there is always going to be people running Storm Raider Surge, and with the upcoming nerf to Thunderlords, if they go through with it, I might actually switch over to it, but I still think that now and even after the nerfs, Thunderlords is just too fitting for Zed not to take. The cooldown synergizes with your W, it's magic damage, it adds to burst, you have many instances of damage, and it will proc on your ultimate even if you miss the Qs after the nerf to it. In the Ferocity tree, I run Sorcery for the extra ability damage, especially as I enjoy building a lot of lethality. Fury is definitely an option, but I prefer the combined increased damage of spells in this overall mastery page. Tier 2 is relatively free, though I think Feast is optimal for early game sustain, and you don't get to auto-attack often enough in lane for Fresh Blood to be as valuable for you as it is for something like an Orianna who can auto-attack a lot in lane. Tier 3 is a mix between Vampirism and Natural Talent. This one I see pros splitting between a lot, both taking a few points in each, taking all in one or the other. So I'm honestly kind of unsure what's the best, even with a lot of testing. I ran with Vampirism for a long time, but the extra 80 on Natural Talent is actually kind of growing on me, especially since Feast already helps enough with the sustaining, combined with an early survivability item, but more on that in a moment. And finally, for tier 4 I run Battle Trance, mainly because of how delayed Zed's bursting in combat is, so you'll almost always get the entire 5% buff from this mastery, but also because the alternatives are a bit unreliable. Consistently getting unique kills from Bounty Hunter isn't something you can rely on, especially considering you now have to ult the high AD targets, and taking 2.5% extra damage is a big no-no in my opinion. Though a tangent here is that the full lethality build burst from a brush or similar is so quick that you basically don't get any bonus on the initial attack, which does kind of blow, but if you're at the point where your burst is so big that you don't have to ult, it might be redundant anyway. And your ult always gets this amazing value from Battle Trance, so at gunpoint I would still recommend Battle Trance above the two others. Moving over to builds, your starting items should as always be Longsword with 3 potions or a refillable if you feel like you can manage with a little bit less sustain but earn a bit more money down the road. Then for your first item I've gone with one of 4 base items: Tiamat, Hexdrinker, Cutlass or Warhammer. Now Warhammer is sort of an exception since I use it to immediately buy Black Cleaver, which is the second item I build in virtually every game. So base item into Cleaver and so on. The reason for this is to get some AD going while not wasting gold on lethality when it's at a low point of value. On top of this, Cleaver is just phenomenal. I cannot see myself not building it in any game. It has everything you want. Huge cooldown reduction, solid AD, survivability, armor shred, and mobility. Very well rounded, works in and against any comp. To decide which base item to go with, Tiamat is for deep pushing, shoving, killing squishies, and helps a little bit with HP regen. Cutlass is for dueling, assassination if you need stickiness, and if you're eventually going to kill tanks. Also helps with sustaining because of the lifesteal. Hex Drinker is obviously versus heavy AP comps or burst AP in mid, and Warhammer is just to build into Cleaver as mentioned, if you feel like you don't need another base item. After Cleaver you pick up your Lethality, which normally starts with the Yomus to round out the CDR to a clean 30%. Then you go Edge of Night or Duskblade depending on the enemy comp. After that I like to complete the base item I started with, or swap it as the last item if I won't need it anymore. If you ended up not going for all of the Lethality items, or you didn't go for a base item, you'll have one slot open for one of these situational items. All of them are fairly self-explanatory with the exception for possibly Death Dance, which is for heavy AD gain, CDR compensation, and most notably, survivability and sustain if you need it. But otherwise, Scimitar versus Annoying CC, Molsar etc, Dominic's Regard versus Heavy Tank, and Mortar Reminder versus Annoying Healing, and so on. Here are some sample final builds. The only one that might not be obvious is the Tank Z one. I've seen many versions of this, some with Static Shiv etc, but this is the one I prefer. You start off fairly standard with a Tiamat as a base item into Cleaver, then pick up Ninja Tabi and finish it off into a Titanic, get Dead Man's Plate, Sterix, and then either Bork or Randuin's, depending on the enemy team comp. If they have Yasuo, Sivir, etc, Randuin's is incredibly efficient, but if you need stickiness and consistent damage and taking down tanks, Bork is a solid go-to item. Also, on a final note, boots are definitely buyer's choice, but normally it's between Tabi, Mercs, Swifties, and mobility boots. It's hard to say exactly when to buy what, but essentially if you need to stick to targets in teamfights, Swifties, lots of CC, Mercs, lots of AD, Tabi, and if you're roaming a lot early game, mobilities. Though I would definitely switch mobilities late game to one of the other three. Thank you guys very much for watching, it was fun hosting you all. I hope I answered any questions you may have had, and if there's something you're unsure about, be sure to post it in the comments below and I will answer to the best of my ability. Stay awesome, I'll see you next time, peace!